We're gonna get started. Feels like a very empty class given what we usually have. Oh well. If you're remote today, you'll want to be in person in the next day or two so that you can pick up what I just dumped on the table, which are some cards. If you are here today, you should come get either a pack of four, or if there's not a pack of four, grab four individual things. And this is going to be something that we do for the next good while.
Can we draw on these?
Yeah, that's the point. I will show you exactly what to draw on them.
Because you're sharing.
What big card is this? Is this like
It could be our game for me.
You need 200, and I think there are 52 or 54 in each, so you end up with a few extra in case you make a mistake.
I'm about to make the most unbalanced card game you've ever seen.
It's okay, I already made it for you. Yeah, you need 4 packs. All right. What you're going to be doing with these is you're going to, I don't know what this thing is and why it keeps doing that, but it's very important. On canvas, there are 4 deck images for you to refer to when you are writing on these cards, and then there are the rules of the game that you'll want to familiarize yourself with so that we can play this in class. We're going to do this, I think, at the start of next week. So I'm giving you between now and Monday to make your decks. How do we do this? We look at one of the decks. Here is deck A, and this is exactly what you want to put on the card. So in one of those 4 packs, all of those cards are going to be transcribed into exactly what you see here card by card. This is the set of cards that are in deck A. There are similar pictures for decks B, C, and D. And then once you read the rules, you'll get a sense of how to actually play these decks. And next week, we're going to be doing some play testing of this, trying to figure out how good these decks are in their current state. I'll give you a hint. They're not very balanced by design. But once we understand how to play, what we're going to want to do is get a sense of how that is. So we're going to be playing deck A versus deck B, deck A versus deck C, deck A versus deck D, B versus C, B versus D, and you'll be able to, with whomever you're playing with, decide which 2 decks you want to play with, and I will throw up both something on the board to tally who wins and loses when pairs of decks are played against each other. And if you want to play this outside of class, I'll also open up a discussion board where you can report your results, and we will just collect all the results throughout the next few weeks as you decide to play around with this, so that we can have the best understanding as a class that we can from this playtest. So in order to do that between now and Monday, please just look at these, write them on the cards in some capacity. You can add your own custom art if you'd like. They're very basic text at the moment, so you can be artistic with this. You can just write the words, and that's good enough. You can abbreviate the words if writing the words sounds annoying, but enough that you know and there's no ambiguity as to what they are. I would recommend at least writing the full words. Let's actually talk about how the game is played. So we will see that from this deck, there are power cards. Then there are cards that have names. So this card has the name Awakening, Inspiration, Medicine, and there is a cost for them. And the cost for this is going to specify exactly how that is done. So M stands for magic power, B stands for biopower, and X stands for a generic power, can be met by any type of power. So this is a bio-magic deck. And what A is trying to do, it looks like, is draw, do some damage, heal, and discard. Those are the 4 mechanics in the game. So each of these different decks prioritizes different amounts of each of those. So unfortunately, I couldn't get all of the rules on a single page. I had to take snips of a book to get the rules. So read rules 1 followed by rules 2. I really wish I could have gotten that in one screenshot, but Harmony is a game meant for 2 players. Each player starts with their own deck of 50 cards. We're going to, for now, have just these 4 decks as they are currently prescribed. To start the game, each player shuffles their deck, then draws 10 cards, and that becomes their hand. A player is randomly chosen to take the first turn. A player immediately loses the game if they have no cards in hand or if they have no cards in their deck. So you cannot empty your hand. You must always have cards in your hand. You must always have cards in your deck. Object of the game is to force the opponent to empty either their hand or their deck before either your hand or your deck is emptied. So we saw power cards, we saw action cards. Power cards provide one of 4 different kinds of power: bio, gear, magic, and science. Action cards have power requirements. Think of them like a cost. If you played Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, very similar to either of those. So they are your currency that you end up spending to be able to do that, but they stick around. So you have to have at least that many power in play in order to use the action card. So the more powerful action cards are gated behind having more power in play.
Question.
Yeah.
So is it like a, so long as I play them, I can use whatever, use whatever card or like?
Yeah, rules 2 will explain the exact turn order and what you can do on each of your turns.
Okay.
But yeah.
One more clarification.
Yeah.
Question. When you put down like what's it called, like or power card, is it like a permanent thing or is it like go away after your turn?
It is a permanent thing.
Okay, so it's like so long as I have I don't have to put down 3 power cards. I just have to put down 3.
Yeah, in fact, you can only play some amount of power
Okay.
at a time.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So generic power can be any type or combinations of the types of your decks. So if a card requires 2 bio and 2 generic, you could use 4 bio power to do it, or 2 bio and 2 magic, or any other combination of at least 4 power. So each turn divided into 3 steps. This is a much simpler Magic the Gathering, in case you're hopefully thinking this could explode in difficulty. It's much simpler. But we have a draw phase, a power phase, and an action phase. On the draw phase, you draw 2 cards from your deck into your hand. Then, in the power phase, you can either play 1 power card from their hand or choose not to. If you choose not to play power, you must discard from your hand. If you have no power to play, you must also discard from your hand. So that's a reason of saying there's no reason not to play a power, unless for some reason there is a card that you would rather discard the power and play and keep around the more powerful cards in your hand. There might be a reason to do that. In the action phase, you can either play 1 action for which you meet the requirements, or discard 1 from your hand to discard. So you must be spending a card, either playing it or discarding it in your action phase. Then action cards do one of the 4 things: damage, healing, draw, and discard. Damage, for each point of damage you do to your opponent, they take the top card of their deck and they put it in the discard pile. So damage, your health is directly embedded in both your hand and your deck. That's kind of your health is between those. There's no separate health mechanic. It's tied together. For each point of healing, you take the top card of your discard pile and put it on the bottom of your draw pile. If there are fewer cards in your discard pile than the amount of healing, then you can move all that you can and ignore the rest. For each point of draw, you take the top card of your draw pile and put it in your hand. And to discard, an opponent chooses and discards 1 card from their hand to their discard. And that's if you're dealing discard damage. So damage goes to deck, discard goes to hand, healing restores to your deck, and draw restores to your hand. So a card that says damage 5, draw 4, means your opponent takes the top 5 cards of their deck, puts it into discard. And you get to draw 4 cards from your deck into your replenishing whatever you have lost from your hand. So the first player to empty either their hand or their deck loses. So you're trying to empty, you have some strategy for doing one of the 2 of those to your opponent while preventing that from happening to yourself. And that's the basics of the game. Relatively straightforward compared to a lot of the TCGs out there. But we're going to get some experience playing this, but to do that, we need to actually have the cards to play with. So again, your task between now and Monday is to draw on those cards, make these decks that are prescribed here. Please do not make any modifications from those decks for now. There will be a time and place for that. Yeah.
Will you do it in pencil?
I am actually going to be giving people an extra set of 4 at some later point for you to change up and do what you want. But you're welcome to do it in pencil if you want to be able to make changes. I would recommend that you do it in pencil for the later 4, but this one I think is fine to do in pen.
You're right, we use like shorthands or something for greater than right. Instead of right powers, we'll be right.
Yeah, as long as you can determine that there is no ambiguity, but I would recommend just for clarity of you and your opponent just to write it out. But if you can find an unambiguous way of representing that in some capacity, that would save you a little bit of time and your poor wrist. Not that I did enough damage to that on Friday. But yeah. Other questions on this?
Games are really quick.
Yeah, they're generally pretty quick. In one class period, we should be able to play, a pair of people could probably play 4 games, 4 or 5 games. Especially since these decks are meant to do something. Like one deck is really good at damage, one deck is really good at healing, one deck is, they're meant to have some kind of purpose to what they do. That said, they're not particularly balanced well. And we'll figure that out, exactly what and how that plays out next week. Yeah. So yeah, your deck is hidden and your discard is hidden. All of that is hidden and face down. So that when you take the top part of it, I think it's meant to be when you discard, you put on, it's ambiguous as to whether you put on top or on bottom, but it seems to me to make the most sense to put on bottom, and that way the cards that have been in your discard the longest are what get returned to your deck if you're healing.
Quick question. How many cards did you say we have to make exactly?
There are 50 cards in each deck, and I think there are either 52 or 54 or 56 cards in each deck. So there will be a few left over from each. And that way, if you're writing in pen and you make a mistake and you really don't like how it turned out, you have a few extra. And if you need more than this, I think I'm going to end up having more than enough. So try not to use more than your allotment, but as long as not everybody uses more than their allotment, I can handle an extra pack or 2 out people who need it.
And it works out to about 30 cards a day, right? Well, it's Wednesday. No, it's a little more. 40 cards a day.
Yeah.
When do we have to have this done exactly?
I will have a better date anticipated by early next week. So the plan is we're going to get to another activity that we're probably going to get to and do before this later this week. We kind of have activity right in a row. And if that's the case, then maybe this pushes this out a little bit past Monday of next week. Monday is the earliest that I think we're going to get to this and want to do it. That said, it might be Tuesday of next week. It might be Wednesday of next week. But as we start to get a clearer picture of how close we are to that, I'll let people know that there's a little bit more time to get ready for this. But yeah, I will also make a mention of this in Canvas when we are going to be doing this in class, because I want as many people as possible to be there for that. And that's also the case for the other activity that we're going to be doing. So yeah, starting for the next week or so, it'll be really good if whenever possible, people can be in class. All right, but to get there, we have just a little bit more to do. Any questions on anything before we dive into some more balanced content? We at least want to get through this balance before we do this, so we have ways of thinking about the balance as we play this. And there will be another activity that we do as we do that. So we talked about a couple different kinds of balance before. We talked about math balance. We talked about, what else we talked about? Difficulty balance. And now we're going to talk about progression related balance. So this is something like your power progression. How is the player growing in power over time? So stat gains, level gains, increased abilities, what items or equipment do they have? And then factoring in things like player skill into this. All of that is a big formula for figuring out the rate of progression in the game. How much of the power comes from their stats, from their levels, from their abilities, from their equipment, etc. So there are games where power progression is as simple as possible. Chess is a great example of that. There is no equipment in chess. There is no stat gain. When a unit defeats another, it doesn't level up. It's very basic. The only benefit in chess is your player skill. That is the progression.
What about advancing a pawn to a queen?
Yeah, that's kind of a level up mechanic, but it is equivalent across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true, that when you do that, it's kind of there's a promotion. But it's also quite rare, I find. At least at high level. That doesn't usually happen much. So here's an interesting question that maybe someone would care to take a stab at. There's no right answer here, but games with smooth progression or spiked power progression, more interesting. Smooth just means that something like every half hour you gain a level, and each level you gain the exact same amount of stat points, skill points, and each of those skills add about the same. So as you play the game, your level of progression is very prescribed. You feel like you're consistently getting stronger, and you're getting stronger at about the same rate. Spiked power progression is more like you work 4 levels of minimal improvements to get the prerequisites for a 5th level big benefit that dramatically increases the power of your character. And maybe at the end of those 5 levels, the associated player character power is the same, but one was steadier and one was you worked for something and got a big increase. Of those options, which one is more interesting to you and why?
Definitely the spiked one.
Spiked?
I'm not sure if this quite applies, but in Risk, at least the versions I've played, at the end of the game, the balance of power keeps shifting because players, when they acquire the 3 cards to get more troops, it's always like the number of troops keeps increasing, so they keep it avoids gridlock because of each player gets this spike in their resources suddenly.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more interesting. But the smooth progression makes me think of the Souls games where you fight a boss and it's really hard. But if you grind, your stat increases are usually pretty marginal, but those sometimes it's just a slight marginal increase, like your stats is the difference. It strikes that balance of like you're just good enough to beat it, but it's still really hard, which is kind of essential.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer to this, and there are right answers within different games. Different games do this differently in ways that make it interesting. But in general, if something stays the same for the player, it becomes stale. And if you spike the progression in some capacity, it feels like the player has reached a milestone or something that even not all levels are the same or all skill acquisition is the same, and that can make players feel like their decisions carry more weight in that regard. That's not necessarily always a good thing, but it leads to some interesting design decisions and then creates some interesting play decisions out of that. Post-boss spikes, yeah, like in Terraria. So that's a good example. So we can define difficulty progression as a large-scale rate of change in difficulty divided by the player power. So if we're just looking at that quotient, if that quotient gets larger and larger, the difficulty over player power, then the game is getting more difficult. But if you divide it by power and skill, Now you're trying to find a single metric for how powerful the character is and how skilled the player is. That can stay, the goal of development should be for that to stay the same. As the player gets more skillful, the power doesn't quite get as much to make up for that. Or the difficulty increases as the player skill increases, as they're still acquiring more player power in order to keep that quotient being relatively similar. And that defines the difficulty of the game. If that quotient is 3, that game is going to be harder than if the quotient is 1. And maybe different games will target different difficulty levels with regards to that, but it should stay relatively the same throughout your design so that you're targeting the same player base. What do we think about smooth versus spiked difficulty progression? So I was just saying that smooth is good, but is it interesting if you have a spiked difficulty progression?
I'm inclined to say necessarily. I'm inclined to say no, but I can't exactly place my thoughts on why.
Interesting. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I only thought is like, at that point, you know, like the boss that you're right before, and you think like, oh, I got one more level, I can get that big boost before I go to the boss, I have a little more reason to grind in the area before I have to progress, rather than be like, what's the point of grinding? If I'm gonna-
Yeah, a spike difficulty progression, if the player knows that it's coming, I think if the game communicates that well, then the player has a decision about whether they prepare for that. And that can feel like I really had to train myself up for this difficult encounter. And then you feel a sense of accomplishment when you defeat it.
It's definitely more interesting, but interesting doesn't mean good.
Yeah. Yeah, I would completely agree with that, but it really depends on the game. But it should be prescribed when you design a game if you're making a smooth or a spiked power progression and difficulty progression. So just having this in your back pocket when you're designing something, it's a way to mathematically understand that. Of course, guessing at the level of player power. Sorry, the level of player skill. There's no way to know that without a significant amount of play testing, understanding how your players play the game, how skilled they are at different points in the game to be able to measure that. And that will vary from player to player. But you can target a particular player skill, and then you have a mathematical representation of the difficulty progression, and you can see that it is in fact constant. Or you can see that a boss is designed to have a difficulty progression spike right there. So this is the question of the balanced but difficult boss versus the unbalanced, arbitrarily difficult enemies. You can make a power spike at a boss, and that makes sense to the player. But if there's a random encounter that has a very powerful random enemy that is not a boss, and the player doesn't see that coming, if that is more difficult than the last boss that they fought, or more difficult than an upcoming boss, that can feel like almost breaking the fourth wall, or a very strange idea that they didn't know was coming.
And you could probably signal that in other ways too, right? Like
You
if
could.
there's a new area and there are new types of enemies, then that would let them know like, oh, I'm just sort of, this is a different area that's hard.
Yeah.
The nether.
Make the enemy bigger, make the enemy
Oh, yeah.
flash red, make the enemy something that signals. Don't do this unless you know what you're doing, right?
The classic red glowing eyes.
I'm reminded of Final Fantasy XII's large dinosaur in one of the opening areas. It's a very large dinosaur, and you are not supposed to fight that right away. But it's open world enough that you can avoid it. But it's so much bigger than you that it's signaling that it's going to be difficult. Doesn't need to outright tell you that, but something about the visuals of the game warn you of that. But yeah, difficulty and rewards are also related. Players expect to be rewarded when you spike the difficulty on them. So make sure that you're aware of difficulty spikes and that you are balancing rewards around what you're asking your player to overcome. So yeah, if you don't know what's challenging, you can't balance your own rewards. So you as the designer need to know, again, what you're asking your player to do. If you over reward your player, then you may be asking them to do additional grinding. If they're not happy with that additional grinding, they may be dissatisfied, feeling like the game is forcing their hand, making them play the game in a certain way that they don't necessarily want to play. Some games are designed around that, but that's the niche audience that they are designing for. So we can talk about gameplay progression as well. How are new mechanics introduced to the game over time? Very early on in the game, you're going to be introducing the basic mechanics in a tutorial, but how much of the game are you forcing the player to learn within that tutorial? How much of the game are you putting off until an hour into the game, 2 hours into the game? How do you keep a 20-hour game feeling fresh in the 18th hour? Are you including new mechanics at that point or new ways to use existing mechanics? How is the progression of your gameplay? How is that distributed throughout the game to keep player interest, to keep players doing new things, and to continually challenge players who have mastered prior elements of the game? So a new game mechanic, new skills that are unlocked by being a certain player level, new item types that are available, new enemy types that are more challenging. The game needs to be consistently providing a new experience so the player has something to continue to experience. New experiences are much more interesting than old, stale experiences. So always try to have something new that you are introducing the player to do frequently. Yeah.
I haven't played the game myself, but I've heard Horizon Zero Dawn has enemies where like they can learn how you've beaten them before.
Yeah.
Like as you progress, and just still feel like they get harder because you have to find new tactics to beat the same enemies on.
Yeah, that's a really cool use of data collection, artificial intelligence, force the player to adapt to the monster's adaptations, which forces the monsters to adapt, which forces the players to adapt. That said, that's not necessarily what every player wants to do. A player wants to find a strategy that works and then use that strategy for the game. So the game is dictating that you are understanding the full breadth of mechanics of the game and are switching up your mechanics to show expertise over all of the different mechanics. That's a design-based decision that may work or may not for different players. But it's cool that it exists. So narrative progression, how are story elements peppered throughout the game? On one hand, you might have games that have no story and are focusing completely on gameplay progression, so there is no narrative progression. On the other hand, you might have games where every couple of minutes, you just get a quick aside with your characters and have a 5-second blurb. On the other hand, you might have, I don't know, Xenosaga that has, what is it, an hour and 45-minute long cutscene at one point, and the entire game has, I think, over 20 hours of cutscene, 25 hours of cutscene, might even be more than that. It's a very story-driven game, and when you get a cutscene, you put down the controller, you step back, you know you're in for the equivalent of an episode of a show, or possibly a movie. And in a story-driven game, that might help the player who is emotionally invested in the story. If the player is not interested in the story, that can be a terrifying experience. Why won't this cutscene end? I just want to play a game. I wanted to watch a movie. I would have watched a movie. But again, that depends on the game and what the game is trying to do. How narrative focused is it trying to be, and how is it disseminating that narration? So we talked about common story structures. And if you stick to those for the most part, you'll have some inspiration for where and how to put your story elements into games, unless you decide to break those and go off and do your own thing, which you absolutely can do. Let's talk about PvP balance, player versus player. How do we balance PvP games? So we can start by looking at the initial conditions. So what is the data when the players begin their conflict? How likely is each player to win when the game starts? At this point, you should be assuming equal player skill. This is why we have matchmaking, so that you can attempt to pit players with equivalent skill against each other. You don't want to design for one player having more player skill than the other necessarily, unless you design your entire game around that concept. Watch for things like imbalance in turn order or starting position or characters, classes, factions, etc. So Magic the Gathering, for instance, has an imbalance in turn order. Someone has to go first. And it's not snaked in turn order, meaning it's like player one, player two, player two, player one, player one, player two. It's player one, player two, player one, player two. And going first has an advantage. So there needs to be a drawback to going first to give some other kind of advantage to the player who goes second. And the player who goes second draws a card on their first turn. Gets card advantage so that they have more options later in the game, assuming the game lasts that long. So just be aware of things like that when you're asking players to play against each other. Absolutely, use matchmaking. Look for multiple strategies. So you will design for there to be certain strategies in your game, but also be aware that additional strategies will develop that you did not see coming. You want to, for every strategy that you can imagine your players using, there should be, at least initially, a near equal chance to win when they decide on that strategy. So something like an aggressive versus a control strategy in Magic the Gathering. An aggressive deck wants to win very early. A control deck wants to gain card advantage. Wait until they have more resources than their opponent and cast bigger, better spells than their opponent later on in the game. But they have to survive long enough to have that level of advantage. Two very different strategies, but you need to balance players who want to do that. It shouldn't be a bad idea to do one or the other of these things, just because of the rules of the game, the cards that exist. There should be equal opportunity for these different strategies. Random play is not a strategy. Don't balance for someone who is doing things randomly. I don't think my mother watches these recordings, but in case she does, I'm sorry in advance. I beat my mother at everything we play. We should not balance against her random strategies. I want to be rewarded for having a more logical approach to the game. Sorry, Mom. How do you balance individual game objects? So these individual game objects are something within the game that has, these are either your resources or your items or equipment, something that you want to provide interesting decisions or choices for players. So an example of this as a game object would be a card in a trading card game. If every competitive deck has the same card in it, that tells you that it's imbalanced. Everyone wants to use it regardless of what their strategy is. It would be better if these game objects were balanced around, we're going to use different game objects depending on our strategy. That means the game objects are going to have different values to different people at different points in time. That creates opportunity for trade. It creates opportunity for cooperation. You have something that I want. You don't want to give it to me, but you can use it in a way that is beneficial to me. I can now give you something in exchange, and we can cooperate so that we get something from each other. A best gun in a competitive shooter, something that everyone is trying to strive for. If it's a race to get that gun, and whoever has that gun wins the level in a PvP environment, that's not necessarily a great thing. The game is over. It might as well be a maze and a race to the finish of the maze, and not a shooter, because it devolves into that, because the gun itself is imbalanced. Players should have choices. Do I go for this or go for that? Race to a particular technology in a 4X game. Explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. If you are unaware of the 4X, they really should be 4Es, but they're 4EXs. And oftentimes there's a tech tree. You're in charge of a larger civilization, a larger galactic force, something where you're researching technology over time. If there's a technology that's highly imbalanced, then it becomes a race for that technology, because whoever gets there first is going to have a very large competitive advantage starting at that point. In which case, that might as well be the game over condition. Kind of like with the gun in the FPS, if getting to that technology leads to something that's imbalanced, it would be better if the game just ended there. Players who are losing don't want to spend a lot of time losing. Once they're aware that they are losing, the game should end relatively quickly, or the match should end relatively quickly. A best character in a fighter. This reminds me of, I'm gonna show my age, but I was playing in an arcade and I just walked up and there was a Soul Calibur 2 tournament. I had never played the game before. I chose a character who looked cool, smashed a single skill, and won the entire tournament, having never played the game before, against people who had played the game before. That character was imbalanced. I'm not that good at the game. I had a ton of fun, but I think I was the only person in that tournament who had a ton of fun. We shouldn't balance the game around one person having fun and a bunch of people suffering through that. So we could say that an individual game object is balanced if it's balanced compared to everything around it in the game's universe, everything that uses that game object, everything that's relevant to it, and it's comparable to the balance of other similar game objects. So ways that you can measure this are in terms of its stats. In some way, you can compare its stats to other stats. You can incorporate the cost. Something that is better should cost more or involve more of a detriment. A rarity, something that is better can require more player effort to acquire, and then you reward the player for that effort with something that is better. And then you can benefit, you can have strengths and weaknesses within that, yeah.
I was just thinking that a lot of these seem to be tailored towards competitive, competitive game, but if it's like a first player game, then
Yeah,
I want to have a best game because then that's something for you to strive for. Yeah.
right, yeah, if it's a single player game, then it absolutely makes sense. In a multiplayer environment, if it becomes a race for a particular game object, then the game might as well be over at that point, I guess.
So Quidditch is bullshit.
Yeah. I thought as soon as I read that for the very first time as a kid, I just thought, what is the point of everything but the seeker? Everyone else is wasting their time and getting injured for no reason. It's basically football. So yeah, objects should also have strengths and weaknesses. So you can make an object have significant amount of strength and balance that with some amount of weakness. And that can tailor how the object is used in a way that creates an imbalance in one area and an imbalance in another area, where the weakness is now exploitable. Think of it kind of like a rocket launcher. It does a ton of damage, but it fires very slow and has a long reload time and deals splash damage that means that you can't fire it at point blank. There are quite a few limitations to the benefit of lots of damage that can be exploited by an intelligent player. So that's an example of an item that's balanced with significant strengths and significant weaknesses. And then every object that you design, think about why would people use this object? There's nothing more infuriating. That's probably not true as an over-exaggeration. It's very infuriating when I am presented with lots of options and many of them are just useless or copies of each other. Why does this object even exist in this game? It has no purpose. Maybe it originally had a purpose, but it no longer has a purpose because of balance, because of content that's been released over time.
I can think of one purpose. In Halo Reach multiplayer, the spiker is a terrible gun. But you can style if you're way better than somebody else and you kill them with the spiker, it's like you just style them.
Yeah.
You just kill it with something that like you shouldn't have been able to do that. So
Yeah.
that's one reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like the humiliation weapon. It's like you lost to like the dumbest weapon.
Right? Yeah.
Style with interesting thing. I'm Borderlands with my kid, and he always just picks whoever gun looks cool, even though that it's a terrible gun.
Eventually, you'll understand numbers, but for now, at least you look cool when you lose and die. That's funny. Love kids. We're eventually going to dive into a lot more detail on this and look at how to understand the mathematical relationship of game objects, both in PvP and PvE settings. how you might design those differently, but that's a later unit. But it's something we will come back to because this needs a lot more detail, not just a high level idea of you should think about this, but we'll dive into how do you think about this. But we will come back to that. For now, we just should be thinking about it. Common thread for this, especially in PvP games, is fairness. We want a game to feel fair. Balanced game in a PvP setting feels like every player feels like they have a chance to win at all points in time. Once that stops, the game ends very quickly. That is an overarching design goal for PvP games. And perception can be a big part of this. If you feel like if I get lucky, I can catch back up, that's great. But also note that different players have different perceptions. Someone who is statistically aware, and if I get lucky is a 1 in 10,000 roll, suddenly they don't feel so good anymore. So it's worth understanding the psychology of your players so that you can try to help them and design for their perceived balance so that they feel like it is balanced as they are playing. Even if it isn't balanced in actual practice, if it seems balanced to the people who are playing the game, then it's balanced. Which is a strange way to basically say, ignore math in favor of people's emotions. The one place in the world you can do this. Okay, politics is the other. So dials of balance. What options do you have? What can you change if you're trying to balance your game? The first is difficulty. You can change the difficulty of this. Each individual encounter can be tuned. The game overall can be scaled up or down in difficulty so that's nice. Quantity, it's another dial of balance. You can add more of something, you can remove some of something, and that can be enemies. That can be item drops. That can be health, damage, resources. Any of that is quantity. And the final one is timing. Is something occurring too early, too late, or at the right time given the player's expectations, or given the emotional effect that you want that event to have? So things like plot points, tutorials, feature bloat. I threw this on here as it was very strange. I don't remember why I threw that on there, but there was a joke associated with it in some capacity. Unfortunately, it's been a year since that, and I'll just leave it as a very weird aside, unless someone can come up with why I put that there.
Oh, wasn't it because of the beds that like tried when she tried the different beds and this was too hard?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Too little, too much, or just enough. Too easy, too difficult, or just right. So I think I searched for a Goldilocks and the Three Bears game, and sure enough, that exists, a hidden object adventure.
Yeah.
Everything's been thought of.
Mama Bear is just a little bit cursed. I don't know why. Something about that that's.
Yeah. So things that we should consider when we're going to adjust one of these things. Who is the game being made for? So balance looks differently if you're designing for family-friendly games versus something like Korean speed-tuned StarCraft. I tried to find very distinct black and white examples where on one hand, you're trying to have a good time with a child who has a very different level of ability to engage with difficulty and mechanics. And on the other hand, Koreans playing StarCraft. If you've ever watched that, it is the equivalent of just, I don't know, there's really no comparison. It is a sport, and it is a sport that is dominated by people who are very good at what they are doing. It's pretty incredible to watch from the player's screen. If you're looking at usually there are announcers, and the announcers are treating it normally, but if you look at the actual screen of one of the players, that is the most dizzying thing I think I've ever seen in my life. If you have epilepsy, don't look into this. Next is, why is this game being designed? So designer's intent? How hard should it be for the target audience? Once we've identified who we're designing it for, do we want to be challenging them or do we want to be giving them a relaxing experience? So scale from a meditative game to a masochore game, which is just meant for masochists. Finally, purpose. Why is the game being made? Are we balancing for fun, for continued revenue if you're making a mobile game? So time versus money. You can allow people to pay for convenience in your game. So if you're balancing for continued revenue, this can make a lot of sense. If you're trying to balance based on a gambling addiction and trying to get people addicted to your game and spending money on your game, then not only are you a monster, but there's a very good opportunity. And we'll go into the mobile market as well and how to design for the mobile market and also how to be aware of what the mobile market is doing to you.
Does it include a mention of whales?
Oh, yes.
What?
Whales, people who have so much money that it doesn't matter. They'll
Oh,
pay for anything in order to get a competitive advantage. Game exerted pressure, things like, I will stop your ability to play this game unless you wait or pay money. Pay for energy, pay to climb a leaderboard. The games for these are designed for you to be close, but not quite at the goal, whatever the goal is that you're trying to get to, and it exerts pressure on you to pay to reach the goal faster, or even to reach the goal at all. That is the entirety of the mobile market. You play any mobile games, you will see this, and by the time you're done with this class, you will see everything they are doing to you and understand how to profit from the same idea.
I like
So, Redive.
this and older. Just always pushing that thing up the hill.
Yeah. So we don't have a ton of time, but let's start with a little bit of discussion here. What games have you played that have felt well balanced? And what design decisions, instead of just identifying the game, think from a designer's perspective now. What did they design that made the game feel balanced?
I think most of the Souls games are fairly well balanced. That might be a hot take. Disagree. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's because you run into a lot of really hard barriers, but you always have the option to sort of grind a little bit to upgrade your avatar. So you tend to find a sort of sweet spot if you're just powerful enough that the fight's hard, but you can beat it and then progress to the next area.
When the player is in control of the balance.
Yeah. So if you're really good, you can go through the game pretty quick because you don't spend a lot of time grinding. But if you're not so good, it just takes longer, but you still can get through it.
Yeah. Sense? Any other thoughts or games that people want to share?
Mario Kart kind of comes to mind because
Mario Kart?
if you fall behind, it gives you opportunities to do things like the blue turtle shell.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're in second or third place, you're pretty much not going to get the turtle.
Okay, so having catch-up mechanics.
Yeah.
And making sure that being in a disadvantaged position doesn't feel like you're falling further and further behind, but you have opportunities that other players don't have to catch up to them. Sure.
This isn't an example, but I do kind of want to ask, like, where does like rubber band AI like fit into the mix? It's like the kind of AI where it's like, if you're behind, they'll intentionally go slower, but if you're ahead, they will intentionally try to like, they will like catch up with you. It's usually like pretty aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. So racing games do this a lot. If you're in first place by a lot, it's an adaptive difficulty metric to almost teleport the cars. They don't necessarily follow the same laws of physics, or they start acting extremely optimally and find a way to catch up to you because the balance is for you to feel like I'm close to losing first place whenever you are in first place. Similarly, the cars will slow down when you're in last place so that you never feel like you're completely out of the race. So that is a form of balance, but it's targeting the emotion of you want to feel like you're in the race and you stand a chance, like there are stakes at all points in time. Whether that's a good idea or not, I don't have any opinion on. There's no right answer to that, but some games are designed that way and some games are not designed that way and deal with the associated consequences. But it is a form of balance. I guess we'll come back to this tomorrow, and I think we are reasonably close. Maybe we have a whole day left. Maybe we'll get a chance to start this activity tomorrow. But one of the most fun activities of the quarter, in my opinion. They're going to be playing an in-class game and trying to understand its mathematical nature. Tomorrow for that.